Hello, welcome to our lifestyle webinar, Narcolepsy Gut Check. I'm Christine Hackenbrook, Operations and Program Manager at Narcolepsy Network. I have narcolepsy, and my son does as well. We are very interested in tonight's topic on gut health and how that can affect our narcolepsy symptoms. Now I'm proud to introduce our speaker for this evening, Ellen Wermter. Ellen is a family nurse practitioner at Charlottesville Neurology and Sleep Medicine. Ellen is a dedicated sleep professional, both board certified in behavioral sleep medicine, as well as being certified in cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, who actively treats patients full time. She is nationally regarded for her expertise in narcolepsy. Welcome, Ellen, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy that you could be with me tonight to talk about narcolepsy and nutrition. Thank you to the Narcolepsy Network for inviting me to be a part of this event. And I also want to thank my patients with narcolepsy who I learn from every day. And one particular person with narcolepsy who's an advocate who helped me develop some thoughts and ideas about this presentation tonight, this webinar tonight. So without further ado, this is Narcolepsy Gut Check with Ellen Wermter. You may have heard of something called the brain-gut axis. So where does this idea come from? During development, infant development, embryo development, the brain and the gut originate from the same neural tube. So essentially the connection is hardwired, and we can see patterns of connectivity. However, all the ways that these systems interact are not fully known. So this field of research is in its infancy. The exciting news is that we learn more about it every day. On today's menu, some things we're going to cover today are, first of all, what to eat. So what are some recommended types of foods that we should be thinking about? When to eat, timing is important. And then supporting a healthy microbiome. What does that mean? Or what are some ways that we can accomplish that? So starting off with what to eat, I'm going to start with a disclaimer here that I'm not a nutritionist. I am a family nurse practitioner. I have a diplomate in behavioral sleep medicine, but I'm not a registered dietitian. And so these recommendations, first of all, these that we're going to start with are for health promotion and disease prevention, not for disease treatment. And the other thing I want to say about that is that these recommendations may vary depending on what other conditions are present. For example, if you're a person with narcolepsy who also has diabetes or cardiovascular disease, then these recommendations may be different for you. So specific recommendations for you should be discussed with your primary care provider or your nutritionist. Okay, so generally recommendations for a person with narcolepsy are in line with the USDA recommendations for healthy eating for Americans. And again, these are for health promotion and disease prevention, not for disease treatment. So we're going to talk in the next slide about some narcolepsy specific things, some things that can help reduce post-meal slump. But these recommendations are more for, in general, health promotion, disease prevention. So we're talking about lean proteins, healthy fats, a mix of complex carbohydrates, including those whole grains, foods that are high in fiber, foods that are low in saturated fat, foods that are minimally processed, and then limiting consumption of things like caffeine, sugar, salt, alcohol, those types of things. Okay. So avoiding the post-meal slump, specifically for the persons with narcolepsy, there are a few additional recommendations that are designed to help avoid the post-meal slump. So the first one you see here, I know you hear probably all the time, low carb, low carb, low carb. So why a low carbohydrate diet? When you eat, your pancreas releases more insulin. And that purpose of that is to move the rising glucose in your blood into your body's cells to provide energy. After a carb-heavy meal, more insulin is released than is needed. And this causes your blood glucose to fall because it It takes the sugar out of the blood. And so then you get a dip in your blood sugar. This can result in you feeling sluggish, having difficulty concentrating, sometimes even feeling some more significant symptoms like dizziness, shakiness, or feeling anxiety. So to prevent this, stick to smaller, lower carb meals. You can also offset your carbs with added protein that will help to stabilize the blood sugar a little bit. And you can eat foods high in fiber, which has that same effect of stabilization and normalizing that blood sugar. Other possible mechanisms for feeling sleepy after a high carbohydrate meal, one of them is that it may lead to selective uptake of blood tryptophan into the brain. So you've probably heard about tryptophan in regards to you eat that turkey at Thanksgiving and it's got tryptophan in it. Well, tryptophan is an amino acid that's found in lots of different foods, not just turkey. We ingest it and then it circulates in our bloodstream. But after a high carbohydrate meal, what you can get is more of that tryptophan coming from the bloodstream into the brain. That increases the synthesis of serotonin and it increases sleepiness. So you can get higher sleepiness levels after high carbohydrates by that pathway, as well as by the insulin blood sugar pathway. So I'm going to review now a study of persons with narcolepsy that was studying sleepiness after glucose, and glucose being, sugar, one of the main carbohydrates. And what they did was they gave these participants with narcolepsy a 50-gram glucose load. And the patients that were given that load had decreased wake duration, so they weren't awake as long. They had a shorter sleep onset latency. They fell asleep more quickly. They had more spontaneous and induced sleep stage changes. So we don't want instability, we want stability, but they had more instability, more spontaneous and induced stage changes. They had more intensity of sleepiness and increased REM, rapid eye movement sleep duration during a nap. So there have been some studies. That's one of them that I wanted to talk about with you. When you're getting that glucose load, those are some of the various effects that it can have on you and why they might trigger some sleepiness. Okay, so number 2 is to avoid larger meals. That basically, the rationale behind that is the bigger the meal, the more energy you're going to expend toward digestion and breaking it down. And so that you expending that energy is going to lower your energy overall and you're going to feel more tired. And then number 3, avoid foods that cause inflammation. And the reason for that is that inflammation causes an increase in cytokine levels. Cytokines are chemicals that help your immune system communicate, but high cytokine levels make you sleepier. And some examples of foods that might cause inflammation are red meat and sugary foods. And then the last one here for some sort of specific recommendations are to consider food intolerances and avoid those foods that you are intolerant to. So that's going to vary by individual, but if you're noticing some patterns in your reaction to food, then you're going to want to avoid those particular foods. And if you're noticing, one way to pick up on that is to kind of keep a journal if you're having some symptoms, and then you can better identify those patterns. So gluten sensitivity, for example, is an intolerance. Celiac disease is actually an autoimmune disorder with more severe inflammation and reactions that last longer. But these intolerances, they exist. And so picking up on that and being able to avoid, foods that cause you trouble are one way that you can help regulate your sleepiness during the day. Okay. So what about keto? Most of my patients with narcolepsy, if they have done some research into nutrition and what to eat, you'll eventually come across keto as a potential sort of beneficial way to eat as a person with narcolepsy. Keto, what it is it is a very low carb, high fat diet that over time induces a metabolic state called ketosis, in which your body, instead of burning glucose for energy, burns fat. There are some studies and some anecdotal evidence that it works for some people, but there's not enough evidence to give a blanket recommendation for all persons with narcolepsy. And be sure to talk with your primary care clinician and or a registered dietitian before making more dramatic changes to your diet such as keto, because it is putting you in that metabolic state. And again, going back to those comorbidities, other things you might have, you want to make sure that it's a safe option for you to try. If it is something that you think, hey, let me see if this is something that might improve my sleepiness levels, make sure you have checked that out with someone else who can tell you whether it's safe to try based on everything else going on with you as a whole person. And then I added this slide on narcolepsy medications because they do affect what we eat and also when we eat things. So I wanted to cover this very briefly. For instance, there are certain narcolepsy medications that might have a higher sodium load. And for those, you might need to adjust your diet to a lower sodium diet in order to make sure that you're not going over your acceptable limit for sodium that day. Also, many of these medications can impact appetite or have GI side effects. And this relates somewhat to what you're eating, because you may tolerate certain things better than others, but also the timing of your eating. I do have patients sometimes that will say, I wake up in the morning at 7 o'clock and it's 4 p.m. before I realize that I haven't eaten anything all day. I just haven't felt hungry. And over time, the more days you go in a row without eating until, a long span during the day like that, your body's going to stop expecting food at that time. It's not going to make the digestive juices to take care of that food properly. And so it's going to be harder to tolerate those foods and also to be prepared to digest those foods. So, sometimes you have to think about that. Does it really make sense to not eat until 4 p.m.? No, probably we should be eating within a few hours of getting up. And so you can just, if that's the case where there's a long period with no food and you want to try to add back on food during that time, and then you can start small and just, a cheese stick at 10 o'clock, see how your belly does with that. And if you do it the same time, if you set a timer and do it at the same time, eventually your brain is going to expect food at that time and will start to make the digestive juices to take care of it. And you still might not be hungry, but you're at least going to be following a pattern. And so we're going to talk more about that when we get into the timing next. But just paying attention to those, and you're probably going to tolerate it well, have less nausea or upset stomach as well when your body's expecting it. So we've covered sort of what foods to eat. Now we're going to look a little bit more about when to eat. So timing matters. So timing of your meals matters. Our bodies are meant to follow rhythms that correspond with certain times of day or night. So if humans typically catch and prepare food when the sun is up and we're awake, then it stands to reason that our metabolism would be best optimized for that time of day. So there's sort of an evolutionary precedent for this. So because of that, it's important for our body clocks to be in sync and to follow a predictable pattern. We have our main clock, the coordinator, which is the SCN, or the suprachiasmatic nucleus. That's kind of a mouthful, but that's sort of the orchestra conductor, so to speak. And then additionally, within each individual system, organ, and even cell, are peripheral timing systems for optimization of function depending on the time of day. Okay, so to keep our clocks in sync, there are various inputs that inform clock alignment. Okay, the main input is light, which is why you hear so much about getting outdoor light every day, trying to avoid too much blue light in the evenings when you are winding down. But light's not the only input. These inputs are called Zeitgebers. Zeitgeber is a German word meaning time giver. Other Zeitgebers are temperature, timing of social interactions, timing of activity, and timing of meals, which is why we're talking about it today. Our bodies function most efficiently and effectively when meal times follow a predictable pattern. If you eat lunch every day at noon, your body will start making and releasing those digestive enzymes just before noon to prepare your digestive system to receive and process the food. This is why after a time change or when you travel across time zones, you may notice feeling hungry at odd times or not tolerating food as well. So patients with narcolepsy have at the core of the disease process an instability of sleep-wake. The inputs into the clock system become even more important because of the already underlying instability. So, creating a scaffolding to support the regulation of your rhythms is key. And regular meal times are part of that scaffolding. The reliable input of breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks, if those are part of your nutrition plan, provides necessary structure and helps your body systems to coordinate better, to stay in sync, and to operate at peak performance. So that's why timing matters. Okay. It really is important. All right. What about that healthy microbiome? What about that? What are people talking about when they talk about these types of things? So we're going to talk about why it's important first. Our gut contains a multitude of thriving microorganisms that have lots of purposes. They aid digestion, they destroy harmful bacteria, and they regulate our immune system. This is known as the microbiome. And when it's out of balance, an overgrowth of bad bacteria can occur. An out of balance gut might lead to GI upset symptoms, such as bloating, dyspepsia, sort of like upset stomach, and diarrhea. But it can interfere with a whole lot more. So it's not just those GI symptoms. Here are some other ways that unhealthy microbiome might cause problems. Number one, it can interfere with absorption of vital nutrients. And we don't want that. We want, if you're putting good nutrients in there, we want you to be able to actually absorb them and get the benefit from them. It can alter the intestinal wall permeability, which can pave the way for autoimmune disease. It can increase inflammation, it can weaken our immune system, and it can negatively affect mood and energy level. Remember that brain gut hardwiring that we talked about at the beginning? About 95% of serotonin is made in the gut. Serotonin is a building block for melatonin, which helps the timing of our sleep. Other neurotransmitters are made in the gut, including norepinephrine and dopamine, two neurotransmitters that medications for narcolepsy seek to boost. So you can see that brain-gut connection at work here. We are also learning more about orexin in the gut, but the available studies are limited in the conclusions we're able to draw. It has been theorized that spikes in sugar, like when you eat, turn orexin off, making you sleepy. You don't need to be awake to eat anymore, right? That's the common thought. One study of patients with narcolepsy compared to control subjects showed more dysbiosis. So that means dysbiosis is sort of altered biosis in a negative way. So it means sort of the stomach balance is not where we want it to be. So more dysbiosis of the gut in the group with narcolepsy. So already sort of starting out at a disadvantage. This means that persons with narcolepsy may have to pay extra attention to maintaining the health and the balance of your microbiome because there may be already some underlying dysbiosis there. So what are some actionable items you can try to keep your gut in balance? So the first one, limit high sugar food because this causes an overgrowth of bad bacteria. And a lot of these do fit with what we talked about at the beginning with, foods that are good for health promotion and disease prevention already. So it's good that these line up because we wouldn't want one thing be telling you, something and then another recommendation telling you the exact opposite. These tend to fall along the same line. So that's a positive thing for us. So limiting high sugar, not too big of a high carbohydrate load at one time, carb heavy at one time. The second one is eating foods with lots of fiber. Fiber stimulates the growth of good bacteria. And then the third one is eat a diverse diet. Have you ever heard that expression, eat the rainbow? It just means when you think about the colors of your food, different vitamins and different nutrients are available in the different colors usually mean that different ones are going to be there. And so if you eat a lot of different colors, you're going to get a lot of different nutrients and you're going to get more variety, and that's going to support a healthier microbiome. Plants are always a good bet. Fruits and vegetables are naturally high in fiber. They increase the good bacteria, they help fight the bad bacteria, and they lower inflammation. And then fermented foods, we haven't talked about this one yet, but fermented foods are full of live probiotics. They're often high in lactobacilli. So we're talking about yogurts, kimchi, sauerkraut, miso, tempeh. Those are some examples of fermented foods. And then there are prebiotic foods as well. These are things like onions and garlic and even oats that help to promote the growth of healthy bacteria as well. There are some non-diet influencers of gut health as well. These are exercise, alcohol intake, and stress. So regulating your alcohol intake, managing your stress, and then getting some good exercise in, those things will also help to support a healthy gut.
It was great being here with you, and take care. Have a great night, everyone.